Welcome to Storytime, brought to you by the OWSCyCon2019, the online book event of the year.
At the palace, the automaton girl was given her own rooms and servants. The king lavished her with fine gowns, combs, and jewels fit for a princess. He gave her the name Treasure, for as he often said, she was his dearest treasure. Treasure was an obedient daughter to the king and queen, always saying, "Yes, father," and "Yes, mother," never causing them the slightest trouble, always doing as asked. She sang and danced for her adopted parents and their guests at feasts and parties, charming all who met her. All but the queen, who grew jealous of the attention the girl received, a girl who was not even their own flesh and blood. In the way of the world, the peaceful days of the kingdom did not last, and one day the king had to leave to lead his troops into battle. While he was away, the queen conspired against Princess Treasure. All the queen heard at court was how well behaved the princess was, how graceful, how talented, how beautiful, more so than herself. One day, fed up, the queen turned to a serving boy and demanded, "You there, serving in my hall, who is the most beautiful lady of all?" Frightened, the boy replied, "Your Majesty is most beautiful." The queen grinned, but then the boy added, "However, the young princess, with her dark hair, golden skin, and starry eyes, is the most wondrous I have ever seen." Enraged, the queen chased him until he escaped her by diving into the kitchen. It was outside the kitchen that the queen spied a scullery maid. She pounced on the girl, saying, "You there, serving in my hall, who is the most beautiful lady of all?" Terrified, the girl replied, Your Majesty, of course, is most beautiful." Finally, the queen sighed. Her relief was short-lived because the girl added dreamily, "Oh, but I've heard that the princess, with her raven hair, sun-kissed skin, and eyes that shine like the stars in the sky, might surpass even her mother." "I am not her mother," bellowed the queen, and she chased the maid out into the garden where she lost her among the hedges. It was there that the queen encountered one of the gardeners. "You there, serving aside my hall, who is the most beautiful lady of all?" The gardener, surprised by her sudden appearance, replied, "Why, your Majesty, surely you are the most beautiful." "And?" the queen asked. "And, your Majesty?" "And what about the princess?" "Oh, the princess is a shining treasure. Her ebony hair, shining skin, and jewel-like eyes. Her voice is like listening to heaven itself, and the lightness of her feet—" "Enough!" screamed the queen. The gardener ran off, and the queen stormed back into the palace, determined to get rid of Princess Treasure, who was no princess, but a devil sent to torment her. After 3 days, the queen put her plan into action. She summoned the princess and said to her, "My dear Treasure, it is such a beautiful day. Let us go for a ride through the forest." "Yes, mother," Treasure agreed, and a carriage was ordered. It was a peaceful ride with no talking, for the queen had nothing to say to this usurper, and Treasure had never spent such an intimate moment with the queen, and therefore she had no idea what to do but sit obediently in silence. After a while the carriage came to the very spot where, it seemed so long ago, the king and queen had encountered the traveling performers and Treasure. "Look!" exclaimed the queen. "Do you remember this spot? Stop the carriage. Come, my dear, let us go for a walk." The clearing was rather less clear, filled to waist height with wildflowers and butterflies. "Let us pick some flowers," proposed the queen. When Treasure began to gather the flowers, the queen said, "Oh, no, not the sad and dusty ones by the road. Let us go toward the forest." "Yes, mother," she answered. And so Treasure followed the queen obediently, further and further away from the carriage, and then, urged on by, "It's so lovely, let's just go a little bit further," deeper into the forest. When they came to the river, the queen said to Treasure, "Wait here for me a moment. I saw some lilies over there that I want to pick. I'll return shortly. Don't wander off." "Yes, mother." The queen disappeared, and Treasure waited obediently for her return. But the queen did not return. Unknown to Treasure, the queen returned to the carriage, and pretended to be distraught, telling the coachman that Princess Treasure had wandered off and could not be found. When the men went to search, the queen sent them in the opposite direction of where Treasure waited patiently by the river. Night fell, and still Treasure waited, but she grew worried. Had the queen become lost? Treasure decided to retrace their steps and return to the road where they had left the carriage. But it was dark, and she couldn't see well. She did not find the road and wandered the forest all night. She stumbled in the darkness and injured her ankle, causing her to limp. The next morning she came upon a small cottage. She knocked at the door and peered in the windows, but no one was home. The door was not bolted, so she entered the little one-room home. She saw there were dishes in the sink, clumps of dirt on the floor, and the bed was untidy. Remembering her day's traveling with the performing troupe, Treasure set about cleaning and sweeping the home. It was difficult getting around with the injured ankle, so when her work was done, Treasure sat in a chair at the table and rested. In the early evening, a tinkerer came home, whistling through the forest, returning from selling her wares in a nearby town. The cottage was hers, and she was quite astounded to find Treasure sitting at her table. Minding her manners, the princess rose and curtsied to the tinkerer, who immediately noticed the injured ankle. "Sit," the woman commanded. "Are you the one who has tidied my house?" When Treasure answered yes, she continued. "Then I must repay you by setting your ankle to right. And while I work, you must tell me your story." The tinkerer pulled out her tools and sat on the floor at Treasure's feet, fixing while the automaton princess told her all about performing with the troupe, being taken by the king and turned into a princess, and how she'd waited for the queen, but never saw her or the carriage again. The tinkerer, who introduced herself as Anna, correctly surmised that the queen had intended Treasure harm and left her on purpose. "I see your eyes are wide with innocence," said Anna, "but I think it best if you stay here with me for now. Tomorrow I will go back into town and see what information I can learn." Treasure agreed to stay. She liked Anna, and with the king away, she feared she had no friends at the palace if what Anna suspected were indeed true. Anna made up a bed for Treasure to rest in, as, so the tinkerer said, even automatons must rest their gears. Yes, of course, Treasure agreed. At the palace she had a soft bed that she sank into every night. The bed at the cottage served its purpose just as well. The next day Anna returned to town while Treasure remained at the cottage. Wanting to pass the time productively, Treasure did the washing and chopped wood for the fireplace and stove. Midway through the day an old woman passed by the cottage, heard the activity, and stopped to beg for a few coins or a meal. She was surprised to see that it was a golden-skinned girl with glittering eyes wielding the hatchet. Fearful, the old woman scampered away, stopping only when she left the forest and came upon the palace. After telling the guards what she had seen, the old woman was brought before the queen, where she was asked to repeat her story. The queen, while seething inside that the princess had been found whole and well, maintained a calm exterior. "Oh!" the queen exclaimed with all the emotion she could muster. "It sounds like our dear Treasure, who has gone missing, but we can't be sure." The queen made the woman wait while she went to her private chambers and retrieved a chest with a knob on top. When she returned, she held it out to the woman to have a look. "This is how we will know," the queen told her. "This belongs to the princess. You will bring this to the girl you saw in the forest and give this to her. If she can open it, then she is our treasure, but if not, she will fall down dead." The queen handed the chest to the woman with this warning. "Whatever you do not touch this knob on the top of the box, or you risk dying too."
This story time was read by Phoebe Darqueling and brought to you in conjunction with the OWSCyCon 2019. OWSCyCon runs from May 17th through May 19th. You can find us at OWSCyCon.ourrightside.com. Again, OWSCyCon.ourrightside.com. We have events happening across all genres. If you are a reader, you cannot afford to miss this event. You never know. You may just find your next best read.